Here's my recap of Game 3 in the World Championship final between the world champion Magnus Carlsen and his challenger Jan Nepomniachtchi. So 2 draws so far in the match. Could one of the players make a breakthrough? Let's take a look. So Nepo with white, and once again we had a Spanish opening on the board. So this is named after a Spanish priest, Ruy Lopez de Segura, or as we say in West London, Ruy Lopez, who was one of the strongest player in Spain in the mid-16th century. And he played at the court of King Philip II of Spain. He was a celebrated chess player at that time, and he first wrote about this opening. And, well, almost 500 years later, this is still played at the elite level. It's the most popular opening, actually, at the elite level. So this is all following Game 1 so far. And once again, we have Carlsen, who clearly is ready to play a martial gambit. So that follows after c3 and then d5. And that's known to give black excellent compensation. So once again, we had an anti-martial system. We had h3 in Game 1. And this time, Nepo played pawn to a4, which is a very well-known anti-martial system. So you can see that white is just threatening to take this pawn here. So black has to react. The bishop comes to b7. And there's potentially pressure on this pawn, so that's why d3 is played to just safeguard the pawn in the middle. And white plays this normal move, knight here, and is intending to bounce around to the king side, to perhaps one of these squares. This position has featured in a previous World Championship match, I remember very well. This was the position arrived in the game between Kasparov and Short in London 1993 when I was commentating on that game, and Kasparov won a brilliant attacking game. Short played knight d7 in this position, which took the knight away from the king side. Here, Carlsen played the more standard and I think very prudent move, rook here, which just prepares to drop the bishop back here to protect that key square on the king side. So knight f1, this typical maneuver follows. This is absolutely normal for the Spanish. And here Carlsen played good move, pawn to h6 before dropping the bishop back. So just preventing a possible knight incursion with knight g5. Bishop d2, very normal move for these kind of positions. Bishop covers some important squares here. Bishop drops back. This is an excellent little curl up. That bishop just covers that square, but also it means that the rook has more influence in the center. So it's more difficult for white to make that pawn break, pawn to d4, because there's going to be pressure, sort of hidden pressure there on the center pawn. So knight e3, the knight comes into the middle where it looks at these very important outposts on d5 and f5. But because the bishop has just withdrawn to this square here, then you'll notice that knight is not going to have a great effect when it reaches one of those squares. And now, well, Carlsen plays a really solid move. Just, you can see, dropping with the knight, covering those squares, so that knight really shouldn't come into those squares d5 and f5. So this is sort of rock solid play from Carlsen. You can see he's sort of packing the king side here. And this is actually a very significant moment in the game where you'll notice there have been no piece exchanges and no pawn breaks. So here is the moment where white has to decide on a middle game strategy. Is he going to play on the queen side or the king side? And here I think we see Nepo play in a very prudent way. I think he's kind of curbed his sort of natural instincts for attack for this World Championship match, where he realises that he just has to keep a lid on things. So maybe the bold attacker of, let's say, 10 years ago from Nepo might have played pawn to g4 to attack on the king side. But in fact, black has pretty good counter chances here with the idea c4. And you can see the problem with advancing the pawns in front of the king is that if it goes wrong, then white's king can suffer very badly. There's a huge hole behind those pawns. And you can see that, black has a lot of minor pieces on the king side. Very hard for white to break through, but it could rebound very badly on white. This knight could potentially hop into this square, for example. So Nepo played this pawn break on the queen side, which is a good idea, but it's certainly not attacking the king. It's looking to the other side of the board. Pawn takes pawn, and now knight takes pawn, looking to come into that a5 square. So this is far more positional than some blatant kingside attack. So black's knight comes over and covers the a5 square. Rook c1, so that's a semi-open file. Rooks belong on open files, good move. Well, or semi-open file. Good move from Carlsen, a5, just claiming a bit of space on the queen side. But he's got to be careful because that pawn is potentially a target. So if he can get away with it, all well and good, but let's see. So bishop c3 from Nepo. So you can see the bishop and knight already targeting that pawn. And if he can step up with the queen, that'll be 3 pieces attacking that pawn. So what can Carlsen do about that? Well, of course, he'd prepared something. And this is an excellent move. Bishop to c8. Key piece in the Spanish for white is that the so-called Spanish bishop, that light squared bishop, which just points down to black's king. Now, at the moment, there's no real attack, but it can be significant later on. So what Carlsen is doing is just bouncing that bishop round to neutralize this bishop here. And it also, in an indirect way, defends that a pawn. So, for example, if queen d2, now this was not played, but it's an obvious move, so there are now 3 pieces attacking the pawn, then actually bishop e6 is an excellent move. So it looks through to that bishop here. So if knight takes pawn, then there'll be exchanges here, and black is absolutely fine in that position. Even material, no problem at all. And that light square bishop has been exchanged off. So this is an excellent maneuver from Carlsen. It just kind of neutralizes white's play. So here Nepo had a bit of a think, thought for 7 minutes, and decided to break the position open. So this is the pawn break I was talking about earlier, and lots of exchanges now take place. So that kind of liberates white's pieces. I mean, this battery with queen and bishop look very nice, but notice that bishop is covering that important square on g7. You'll notice once the position has opened in the middle, then that rook comes into play with some pressure on the pawn on e4. So you can see how important this maneuver was. Rook into the middle and bishop f8. Excellent little shuffle of the pieces. And Carlsen continues with his bishop maneuver, bishop here. And that just neutralizes that important bishop. And here, well, Nepo had to think of around about half an hour. Now that's a big chunk of time to invest. So, he realizes he has a slight space advantage here. His pieces look quite nice. They're in nice positions, but actually black is so solid here. I think Nepo realized that he can't actually achieve much. He played pawn to h3. By the way, if knight takes pawn, important tactic. Pawn to c5 is an excellent move. So that pawn opens up the queen's line towards the knight. Attacks the queen. Once the queen comes back, black is more than fine in this position. And knight takes pawn. Everything is fine for black. So the tactics work in black's favour. So that's why Nepo just played this pawn move here, which is a useful move. Once the position breaks open, then there'll never be any danger for the king. The king can just has a so-called Luftloch on h2, square h2, just a little hole where the king can hide. But it's also an indication that Nepo can't really find a positive plan in this position. And Carlsen now played the pawn here, and he had enough time to break in the middle, and this kind of liberates black's pieces actually. So if pawn takes pawn, knight takes, you can see, well, the queen and bishop lined up beautifully, but actually that bishop here protects the all-important point here. And that knight in the middle is a beautiful piece. So after d5, the liberating move, Nepo pushed on, and this leads to a liquidation. Now we have a forced exchange of pieces, and they go into an endgame. So the queens have been exchanged. And here, well, material is still even. I mean, optically, this looks quite nice for white. White certainly has the better pawns here, and those bishops look quite nice as well. So Carlsen still has a little bit of work to do, but he was rock solid here, played an excellent move, bishop here. So that means there's not going to be a problem with this pawn. If bishop takes bishop, well, that's exactly what black wants. You can see those pawns now beautifully placed. So, of course, Nepo didn't exchange there. He took the pawn here, an exchange of bishops, and then king takes pawn. And, well, again, you know, these pawns are split on this side of the board and here. They're not beautiful, but actually they're well protected. That bishop does a very good job of protecting this pawn. And black's rooks are very good here, so you can see that rook has potential to come down here, and this one can potentially come down here as well. So Nepo just steps over with the king. So that means if the rook invades, then that can be covered easily. So Carlsen played the other rook over. There you go, wants to invade on this point. So Nepo just covered. Carlsen's king stepped up. And now we had exchanges. Now, at this point, both players realised that they're basically heading towards a draw. Neither side has any significant advantage here, particularly when the king strides into the middle. And now Carlsen plays excellently, puts that pawn on a dart square, so that really prevents these pawns from advancing on the king side. And c5, so that makes room for this bishop to come here. So that covers this pawn, but you can see that bishop just ties white's bishop to defending here. And now both players just shuffle their kings, and there's nothing that either side can do here, a draw. So I would say a very correct game. We saw Carlsen play a good opening with black. This rook e8 move and this very nice maneuver here, which made his king side very solid. We saw Nepo get, I think, a little bit of advantage in the middle with this pawn move c4. His pieces are very nice. But really, this was a very prudent way of playing from Nepo. He didn't risk that much. So we saw prudence from Nepo, stout defense from Carlsen, and the result, a correct draw. So let's just have a quick look at the scores. There we are. 3 draws so far from best of 14 games. Let's have a look at the match schedule. There we are. So tomorrow, Monday the 29th, is a free day. And then they play game 4 on Tuesday the 30th of November, a significant date. That is Magnus Carlsen's birthday. And remember, if you want to check out the commentary, there's the Chess24 Oslo studio hosted by Kaya. And if you want a deep dive into the position, there's Judith Polgar, ably supported by Anish Giri. And of course, There's Tanya Sachdev, who is on the spot in Dubai. So there we are. Another tense game. I think the players were maybe a little bit tired after the adventures of game 2. So all to play for in Dubai. Thanks for watching.